Fox News Podcast presents Bret Baier's All-Star Panel.
America's got to be in the lead if you want to deal with these threats. We're going to lead.
The mourning is over. The Shiva is done. And if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic.
You know, my main priority right now is making sure that it delivers for the American people.
We have to make our country great again, and I will do that.
I think the president gets criticized by people all the time for the stuff he says, by people who ignore what he does.
Now, Fox's chief political anchor, Bret Baier.
It has been 100 years since Congress voted on multiple ballots to elect a Speaker of the House. And before 1923, it hadn't happened since just before the Civil War.
And this is why just having a narrow majority in the House of Representatives is such a problem for Kevin McCarthy. If he had a big 50 seat majority, which is what we thought he might have, at least some Republicans predicted that, he would be in much better shape.
Now, former minority leader, Congressman Kevin McCarthy, faces multiple rounds of votes, falling short as 19 Republicans opposing McCarthy continuously vote for Congressman Jim Jordan and potentially others. Right now, just Jim Jordan. For a conversation on this and more, we bring in our panel, anchor of the story, host of the Untold Story podcast, Martha MacCallum, senior Axios Political Correspondent, Josh Kraushaar, and Republican Strategist and former campaign manager for Senator Scott Brown, Colin Reed. Martha, you just got off the air. It is fascinating to watch. It really is. It's kind of like a train wreck, but it's still fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, for political reporters and people who cover elections, this is a fascinating minute-by-minute thing to watch. And to watch Jim Jordan stand up and nominate Kevin McCarthy, and we just saw Steve Scalise, stand up and nominate Kevin McCarthy, and yet these two people, you watch them and you wonder, do they harbor any desires of their own for this position? I mean, who wouldn't? Who's dedicated their lives to being members of the House of Representatives? Kevin McCarthy's wanted this for a long time. He hit a big roadblock in 2015. Some unfortunate comments kind of pushed him to the side of that equation, and Paul Ryan reluctantly stepped in and took over as Speaker of the House. So really anything can happen. I mean, in the past, it's always been organized enough before we got to this stage, but I think having covered politics, especially over the window of the last 6 years, we've become used to things not happening or unfolding as we think they're going to. So this is becoming more typical than atypical, Bret, as we watch what we're seeing unfold here. It's fascinating.
Yeah, Josh, Jordan's speech on the floor nominating Kevin McCarthy seemed to be less effective. Well, it was less effective for Kevin McCarthy than it was for Jordan, consolidating the 19 votes. The question is where we go from here. As we mentioned, 100 years since the second ballot, but it's been 1856, they went to 133 ballots from December 3rd to February 2nd before they had a Speaker of the House. One thinks that we're not going to get that many ballots, but we may get a few more.
Bret, we could be here for a long time because there really doesn't seem to be likely path for Kevin McCarthy to get to that 218 magic number to get to the majority. And look, I think a lot of Republicans expected 5, 6, 7 holdouts. There were 5 hard-nosed, but some other skeptics within the conference. But for 19 Republicans on those first 2 ballots to vote for other Republicans than Kevin McCarthy is a real blow to his speakership odds. And it shows that it's not just the hardliners, but there's a broader lineup of right-wing Republicans who don't trust Kevin McCarthy. There's a lot of disconnect between certain members. It's a small faction, but it's enough to really give McCarthy these headaches. And he needs to win all but 4 votes to get to the finish line, and he doesn't appear to be close to that number right now.
Colin, I'm going to read 2 things. One is Larry Hogan, now former Republican governor of Maryland. He tweets, "Today's dysfunction in Washington is more evidence that the divide in our party isn't about policy or ideology. It's between those who want to win and get common sense conservative results and those who want to be a performance act at the circus." There's one side. Here's the other side. This is from Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz about McCarthy. While he claimed to offer fair and equal representation for conservatives on all House committees, when we provided specific names willing to serve on each as he requested, he balked. We asked him for firm commitments on concrete policies for the benefit of the American people. When asked to promise votes on 1, a balanced budget, 2, the Fair Tax Act, 3, the Texas border plan, 4, term limits for members of Congress, he refused. We requested transparent, accountable votes on individual earmarks that would require 2/3 support to pass and to ensure that all amendments to cut spending would be allowed floor consideration. He dismissed it. We demanded that he cease his efforts to defeat competitive conservative candidates in open Republican primaries. He denied it. Kevin McCarthy had an opportunity to be Speaker of the House. He rejected it. So there's two sides. Colin, what do you think?
Well, Brett, it's no secret at this point that 2022 was a disappointment for Republicans everywhere, despite a president with approval ratings closer to 40 than 50 and deep dissatisfaction with the direction of the country. Those big wins that many were forecasting and predicting in election night never materialized. And 2023 is unfortunately for Republicans starting off as an extension of that. And the chaos that's unfolding right now is a byproduct of what happened in the last election cycle, because if Republicans had a bigger majority in the House, Kevin McCarthy wouldn't find himself necessarily in the predicament that he's in. And there's a lot of blame to go around. There's a lot of finger pointing to be assigned. And Kevin McCarthy's got his fair share of detractors in this town. But it's unfair to blame him for the results of what happened last cycle. He raised a ton of money, $500 million all told. He traveled across the country. He worked his tail off to help some of these candidates who are now turned against him get elected in races they had no business being in close races. And now this is the thanks he gets. And look, if you're a conservative, if you're a Republican, winning back the House was no small feat. 2022 election was a disappointment, yes, but winning back the House was a big deal. And this was the chance for Republicans to hold the Biden administration accountable for all the things that conservatives are unhappy about, whether it's the border, whether it's the withdrawal in Afghanistan, whether what's happening with the pandemic and the policies around Dr. Fauci. This House majority was supposed to be the oversight tool. And now they've fallen into this day of chaos and peril to ensure that the limelight will focus on them and not President Biden and not the untested House Democrats. So it's disappointing to be sure, and it's an extension of the disappointing year that last year was.
Yeah, Martha, we mentioned that obviously in 1856 they didn't have wall-to-wall TV coverage, but those images of Democrats, specifically Hakeem Jeffries, getting 212 votes every time, and McCarthy falling short of that number at 203 is, its own message, really. They can keep everything together and Republicans can't.
They can barely repress their glee. They're very excited today. Republicans have the same sort of enthusiasm when they see inner fighting on the Democrat side. There were challenges to Nancy Pelosi as speaker, throughout, people saying that she needed to move on, that they needed fresh blood. She had Tim Ryan run against her at points, and she's had a lot of pushback from the squad. So I think you're seeing that on the other side of the table, although you're seeing it play out for Republicans in a very unfortunate and public way throughout the course of this. I do think that there's a lot of hangover from the midterm elections, and that hangover is also related to the former President Trump. So it's all connected, to this very strong undercurrent that wants to see real reform, that wants to see the establishment sort of taken down and broken apart, and wants to kind of bust the system. And I think that's the emotion that is behind this. I think there are people who look at it and say, good, let them all slug it out. Let them express their opinions. Let Jim Jordan get up there and, have his shot at it as well. So I just find it fascinating, though, if you're watching a movie or casting the movie, you've got these people who are nominating the person to win, and yet they're the person that these other folks are saying, well, that would be palatable to me. Mm-hmm. You also have a question about moderate Republicans and what they would do if Jim Jordan has the gravitas. Is Steve Scalise somebody perhaps who could keep everybody under the tent? But these are going to become real questions if this goes past the next few ballots, and McCarthy will have to reevaluate his position.